Yeah.
Come over here.
No, you had to sit with me.
You're live.
Good morning. This is the meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This is our May meeting. Ms. Edwards, could you please call the roll?
Good morning, everybody. All right, Dr. Blanton.
Present.
Dr. Bullock.
Present.
Madison Edwards, present. Dr. Elliott. Dr. Fleming.
Present.
Dr. Graham.
Not yet, I think.
I see you, but I can't hear you. Vice Chair Griffin.
Present.
Ms. Hoskins.
Present.
Ms. Jenkins. Ms. Jones. Dr. Locklear.
Here, present.
Ms. Patton. Dr. Penfield.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Present.
Superintendent Truitt. Dr. Weddington. Ms. Weisner. Present. And Dr. Winter.
Present.
Okay, I believe we do have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome welcome commission members, advisors, staff, online visitors, and online listeners to the May 9, 2024 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This Standards Commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation, licensure, continuing education, and professional standards of North Carolina educators. I am Ann Bullock, Chair of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the e-board agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of the Commission. Does any member of the Commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the Vice Chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had the opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve this agenda for the May 9, 2024 meeting?
I make a motion that we approve the agenda.
Thank you, Dr.
May
Blanton.
9th meeting.
Thank you. Could I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Winter. Any discussion, corrections, or edits to the minutes? All those, onto the agenda, excuse me. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. The minutes from the previous commission meeting on April 11, 2024 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Winter.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Blanton. Are there any discussion, edits, questions regarding the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the April 11th, 2024 minutes, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. The link for the April State Board of Education meeting has been sent to you prior to this meeting. The recording is bookmarked at the presentations for the Educator Standards and Practices, ES&P Committee, which is the committee that handles the work of Pepsi. If anyone has questions, please let Dr. Evans know, and we will follow up during the June Pepsi meeting. The entire agenda item for this meeting, it relates to the principal preparation portfolio. There's been a task force that's been at work since January. At this time, the DPI staff will present the following people you will hear from. Beginning with Dr. Derek Jordan, Deputy State Superintendent for Ed and Student Achievement. You will also hear from Dr. Thomas Tomberlin, Senior Director of Ed Prep, Licensure and Performance. You will hear from Ms. Erin Larkin McGuire, who's a consultant for DPI who's been working with the task force. And you will hear from Mr. Tabari Wallace, who's Special Advisor for Principal Engagement for the State Superintendent. We also have with us as guests today 2 individuals from Education Assessment? Evaluation Systems, I know that. We have Dr. Kelly Crawford and Dr. Reggie Nichols. Is that correct? Okay. So we may also be asking them questions, and I'll note when we do have questions for them, but they're here for particular content. We'll begin with Dr. Jordan.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. I'm Derek Jordan, Deputy State Superintendent for Educator and Student Advancement. Preparation, licensure, and assessment are 3 of the main areas that fall within my division, and I have the honor of working alongside of the team you tend to hear from monthly. My colleagues and I are before you today to present a proposed portfolio-based assessment system pursuant to Session Law 2023-125. As you know, the aforementioned Session Law, which was ratified last fall during the long session, requires Pepsi to present its recommendations related to the portfolio-based assessment system to the State Board by June 15, 2024. By way of a little background, some of this, if not all of it, you've heard before, we wanted to just paint a picture of where we've been and where we are today. So the principal portfolio for EPPs, that requirement was established in August 2007. And as I just articulated, the session law that passed in the fall updated some requirements related to the portfolio. In December of 2023, DPI staff did a very deep dive into the current reality. We recognized prior to this deep dive and certainly after that we needed to work towards standardizing the portfolio-based assessment. We also recognized that the assessment that was being used, or the portfolio that was being used, was indeed aligned with the North Carolina Standards for School Executives, and of course that needs to continue. However, there was a lack of consistency in terms of format, requirements, and perhaps one of the biggest concerns, lack of validity and reliability. A task force for principal standards, licensure, and evaluation was established and convened for the first time in January of 2024, and the research and selection of the portfolio-based assessment that you'll hear more about today has been well underway since March. The purpose and the work of the principal task force was to gather, broad stakeholder input on the best ways to meet the obligations outlined in session law, primarily related to the portfolio-based assessment system, as well as the internship, which you will hear more about later. In addition, we thought that it made sense to leverage the work of the task force to review the North Carolina Standards for School Executives and ensure alignment with PEASL, given the fact that there had been some shifts that PEASL had made. As always is the case, whenever you have an update in standards, there is the potential for impact on the evaluation rubric. And so those two elements of work are companion elements. The task force has met several times. You see the dates listed there, a mix of virtual and in-person meetings. In addition, between the meetings, there has been work to be completed by members of the task force. The next meeting, as the work continues, is scheduled actually for next week in person here in Raleigh. Very excited about the membership for the task force. You see here represented folks from the various stakeholder groups, educator preparation programs, assistant principals, superintendent. We wanted to make sure that we had diverse perspectives. We have, with respect to our EPPs, we have represented public, private, small, medium, large, and I just want to take a moment to commend the members of this task force. They have been fully committed. They have provided a wealth of input, and as important, if not even more important, is the fact that they have done it with diplomacy. We have not agreed at every step of the way. However, the varied perspectives have absolutely been respected. I also want to acknowledge the work of Drs. Syberg, Evans, Tomberlin, and Mr. Tabari Wallace. They have been the linchpins for ensuring that we continue working towards today. And last but certainly not least, our external consultant, Aaron Larkin McGuire, who has done a phenomenal job in making sure that we are on target, pushing forward, making progress. And we are now about to hear from Aaron. Aaron is an independent consultant who first worked with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction as a coach for the Council of Chief State School Officers Advancing Inclusive Principal Leadership Initiative. She has been a teacher, school administrator, director of special education, and dean of a graduate school of education, where she did extensive work designing master's degree programs for teachers and principals. Erin has been, as I said, instrumental in helping to keep us organized, focused, and productive. Once Erin finishes, you will hear from Dr. Tomberlin and Mr. Wallace. Thank you. Look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon, for that kind introduction. Can I just confirm that you can hear me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for that kind introduction. I want to set the stage a little bit for what Dr. Tomberlin is going to go into in greater detail. The slide you see, we previewed the last time we were before you, and want to take a little bit more time to provide a little bit more detail and context to inform the discussion today. So on the journey to finding a path forward for a strong portfolio-based assessment, we began with a set of considerations, a set of criteria that we wanted to be true about the recommendation. So I want to walk through each of those. So at the top, we have a set of pedagogical criteria. So first, alignment. It's most critical that the portfolio-based assessment meaningfully assesses North Carolina's principal standards now and into the future. It's a meaningless instrument if it doesn't tell us the story that we want to know about our candidates. B, EPP flexibility. As Dr. Jordan just narrated, the history of the evolution of the portfolio-based assessment, what is currently true is that there's a wide range of portfolio-based strategies being implemented across the state. That diversity is strength, that differentiation across EPPs offers some richness. We did not want to pursue a strategy that was overly directive such that it limited EPP's ability to be different from one another and be flexible, but also provided coherence to the overall system. C, in terms of scope, you'll hear a little bit more about this later from Dr. Tomberlin, but one of the things that is distinct about a portfolio-based or a performance-based assessment in contrast to a test is that we need to be intentional and selective in the standards that we are assessing. And so we were seeking a pathway that offered meaningful coverage of the standards. Very early in our research, in talks with our colleagues from Pearson who are here with us today and other colleagues in the field, we heard very clearly that we were not going to find nor develop a performance-based assessment that covered all of the standards. One, because not all of the standards are appropriate fit for a performance-based assessment. They're not all most effectively assessed in that approach. And it's also not necessarily feasible for the candidate nor cost effective. So you'll hear a little bit more about that from Dr. Tomberlin later. D, validity and reliability. You heard Dr. Jordan already reference that currently the approach to portfolios in the field is neither valid nor reliable, which means that our ability to utilize the data from those portfolios is really limited. It's limited at the EPP level, it's limited at the state level. And so as we pursued a portfolio-based assessment recommendation, it was critical that we chose a strategy that was going to get us valid and reliable data so that data can inform continuous improvement in ways that it can't right now. E, user experience. As with any assessment instrument, you want it to be a good experience for candidates. You want them to have the opportunity to show what they know and show what they're able to do. So it needs to be well designed, the task needs to be manageable, the directions need to be clear, and we hope that is evidenced in the artifacts that we've shared with you today. And then those are the pedagogical things that need to be true, so it's a strong assessment. And we also have to acknowledge we're operating in a practical context and that there are some practical parameters that need to be counted for. So A, the timeline. As the premise of this recommendation, we are operating within a time deadline set in statute, which is why we're here with you today and hope that it proceeds into a recommendation to the state board in alignment with the law. B, cost to candidates. There are many licensures across the states in which candidates have a cost in order to be evaluated. Our goal was that this cost was commensurate with other required licensure exams, that it did not feel out of alignment with existing precedent for cost to candidates. C, budget. The desire to transition to a portfolio-based assessment needed to be budget neutral. It did not come with an increase of budget, did not come with an allocation of funds, neither for this upfront work of research and development, nor for an annual allocation. And that relates, just to jump to E a little bit, to scoring capacity. DPI does not have the resources to generate or to create a cadre of scorers for this assessment. We needed to pursue a strategy where the cost to candidates went to a provider that was then used to scoring. There is no budget to allocate for ongoing scoring. This is most similar to the EdTPA, which is already in practice for our teacher candidates. Then to go right back up to D, the ability to customize, this speaks to the alignment. That there are some situations in which using an assessment exactly as is already being utilized in other environments, is a match for North Carolina. In this context, it felt important that we be able to customize and really ensure that this assessment was tailored to North Carolina's standards. So with these criteria in mind and these considerations, we begun a process for arriving at the recommendation that we're presenting for you today. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So here's how we pursued this process. We started by learning, well, what's happening out in the field? And we identified a total of 5 states that are currently implementing a portfolio-based assessment for principals. All of these states worked with external partners. 2 of them collaborated with Pearson, who's with us today. 2 collaborated with ETS. 1 worked with Bloomboard. The journey, the history of each of those assessments is distinct from one another, but we learned about all of them. We researched all of them to determine if they could inform a path forward for North Carolina. And when we did that work, and we looked at our considerations and our criteria, and we looked at what is already happening out in the field, there was a clear choice. The clear choice was to leverage an existing state-specific assessment, the Cal APA, which Pearson, our colleagues here today, worked with California to develop, and then use that as a foundation from which to contextualize to meet North Carolina's needs. And that's the journey that we have been on since March, working in deep collaboration with Pearson and the task force to use the strong foundation of the Cal APA to align for North Carolina to create a North Carolina specific assessment. And so that's where I'm going to pass the microphone to Dr. Tomberlin, who's going to tell you a little bit more about that process and about the details of the assessment.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Erin. Good morning, Commission members. I am Tom Tomberlin, Senior Director of Educator Preparation, Licensure, and Performance. And I will be discussing with you the process by which we have come to this recommendation. So after we determined that Cal APA was the most viable assessment for our work, NCDPI and the task force began the work of modifying the assessment to better align with the North Carolina context. So as you see on the slide, there are three overarching tasks with the assessment. The first is using data to drive school improvement. Second is facilitating communities of practice. And the third is supporting teacher growth. Now, a superficial view of these tasks would indicate that this may not align with very many of our 7 standards in North Carolina. But on the right here, you see that underneath those overarching tasks are activities that the candidate engages in, which may better align with some of the elements underneath our overarching standards. So this information is here. It's not exhaustive. But it's here to be illustrative of the fact that the overarching standards do have activities underneath them that may align with the elements of our current standards. And so we really want to help you understand if we do a deep depth analysis of this relationship, how well this assessment assesses the standards of North Carolina for principals. So to do that, what we've done here is we worked with the task force. So we took the original assessment and we presented it to the task force and asked them to assess both the overarching standard and the underlying activities of the assessment and align it or to give their perceptions of how well that aligned to the elements of our standards. And so you can see here, we've laid this out for you. The column in the middle, Cal APA pre-modification, that is an indication of how well unaltered the Cal APA aligned with the elements of the North Carolina standards. That was the first pass we took with the task force. Based on that feedback, DPI, in consultation with the assessment vendor, developed some alternative language to this or contextualized this for the North Carolina experience. And so after we had done that, we submitted those revisions to the task force, and that is the far right column here, the NCPPA post-modification, and asked the task force members their perceptions of how well this modified version aligned with those standards. And as you can see below, there's a key. So the light green indicates that the task force felt that the activity in the Cal APA, in the NCPPA meaningfully assessed the element. The light orange indicates that the task force's perception was this, that the assessment partially assessed that element. The pinkish color that indicated that the task force did not feel that this element was addressed. And then the blue, we'll get back to in a minute and talk about what that means in regard to the assessment. So you can see here the work of staff helped move many of those elements from either a light orange to a green, or from a pink to a light orange. And those are the first 4 standards, and then the following slide, there we go, shows you the remaining 3 standards and that alignment. So I think it's important to stress here that no assessment that we administer on part of as a prerequisite for licensure in the state of North Carolina covers every standard of every licensure area. What you want an assessment to do is cover enough of the domain so that the logical inference is they have to know all the stuff we didn't measure as well. So it's a sampling of those standards. It rarely is a full assessment of all the standards for any area. And so from our analysis, DPI asserts that this assessment, the modification of the original assessment to what we're calling the NCPPA, does cover enough of those of our standards and assess those standards and those elements of our standards well enough to draw the inference that this candidate is minimally qualified to hold a license in this area. So now I do want to talk really briefly about this recommendation. So I pulled out these 2 elements just to kind of highlight the way that we're thinking about how this assessment aligns with the preparation of a candidate for the principal licensure. So you can see here that in cultural leadership, in these 2 and 3 elements under cultural leadership, that we either have an orange, which is partially assesses the element, or this blue, which indicates that the assessment does not cover this particular element. In the cases where it's orange, we want to highlight this for this board and for our EPPs and for our LEAs who will be supporting principal candidates. Those areas in orange, they need to be the focus of EPPs in regard to how they use experiences, practica, clinical practica, and coursework to address those areas of preparation for our principals. So the assessment may not cover this fully, but where it does not cover it fully, the expectation is the EPPs would ensure that their candidates are getting experiences in those areas that will help ensure that they're ready for success as they enter the role of an administrator. So in the blue, these areas are where both in consultation with our partners in the assessment and with other conversations with external stakeholders, these particular elements may be best assessed through coursework and or the internship experience. So the candidate would need a real life authentic setting in order to demonstrate their proficiency in these areas, as opposed to just a standardized test or a hypothetical situation. And so this is our assessment of the alignment, and where that alignment does not meet, we think we have a strong rationale for how the candidate can be both assessed, supported, and assessed on those elements that are not directly covered by the assessment. So, okay, I've got this. As part of this work, so just to give you some sense of how we approach this work, the NCDPI staff reviewed the Cal APA and looked for places where we felt perhaps there wasn't as much clarity as our candidates would need, and/or it did not really align with the North Carolina context. And so what we did was we went through a process of modifying that language to provide both those things, clarity and context. So in the yellow updates, you can see the original in the gray box to the left. That was the original standard, and the staff of NCDPI modified some of that language in yellow, so our candidates know better what we exactly mean by that, which may be a little opaque in the Cal assessment. I'm sure it's very clear to Cal participants, but we wanted to make sure North Carolina participants understood what we were asking them to do. In the green, we further modified the assessment to make sure that candidates understood this in the context of the North Carolina principal standards. And you can see how those modifications draw directly to the North Carolina principal standards and help the candidate orient to the assessment requirements to our standards and their preparation programs. Finally, when and if the State Board of Education, if PEPC furthers this recommendation to the State Board and the State Board approves this is the assessment of record for our principal candidates, there will be a period of implementation that NCDPI has to engage in. And just to give you an overview of what those look like, DPI would have to conduct analyses to determine what the appropriate cut score is for this assessment. And then we will work with our partner on the assessment to develop support materials for both EPPs, LEAs, and the candidates, and then conduct training sessions for those affected stakeholders so they are clear about what the assessment does, what the expectations are, how it is scored, and what the implications of not meeting those scores are, how one remediates or moves forward after potentially a failed attempt. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Tabari Wallace, to cover future work.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, one of the next steps of the task force will be to work on the internship framework. Ultimately, it's the experience obtained during the framework that drives the collection of the materials and artifacts that's contained in the assessment. This work will include a list of recommendations of the competencies, experiences, and artifacts that should be covered, collected, or practiced during the internship. This will also include specific guidance for the host principal. The resultant framework will establish a baseline of the internship expectations, regardless of part-time or full-time pathways. As far as the standards, the task force will also continue to identify the proposed revisions to the North Carolina School Executive Standards to align with the current professional standards for educational leaders, better known as the PESAL standards, that was actually revised in October of 2015. This work actually began in 2019, but was stifled by the advent of the pandemic. With the creation of our current task force, this lends an opportunity for a fresh set of eyes and context as we continue this work. The North Carolina Principal Advisory Committee, better known as NCPAC, which consists of all of the North Carolina State Principals of the Year dating back to 2013 to present, and it also consists of the last three North Carolina State Regional Principal of the Year cohorts from 2021 to present. They have actually dedicated their last two principal summits. They've been working on this for the last 2 years. The last two state principal summits has been dedicated to this endeavor. Their expertise will be vital to the application of these standards. Once the proposed revisions for the standards are finalized, the task force will also make any related revisions to the North Carolina School Executive Evaluation rubric. As a reminder, no changes to the standards or rubrics will be made without a specific and direct presentation to UPEPC and approval by the North Carolina State Board of Education. As you can see, there's a lot of complex pieces, a lot of moving pieces, but there are more to come. Please allow me to thank Drs. Jordan, Tomlin, Syberg, and Evans for their partnership during this event. And I think we're passing it back over to Carl for the final.
Are you done? Okay. Thank you all for that very in-depth presentation. I'd like to open it up to the commission members for any questions at this point. I have 6, but I'll let everybody else go first. Anyone from online that's joining us online as a commission member, just unmute if you have a question or need clarification. Does anyone online have a question or clarification, or do y'all just want to hear my 6 questions? Go ahead, Kim. Dr. Winter.
I have one, but I think, it's probably to be determined along the way, but I guess I'm wondering if the cut score process will be like what happened with EdTPA. There would be cohorts of candidates go through the process, we'd look at their performance and develop an appropriate cut score?
So possibly. So I can't be specific about what that process would look like at this time. But if we look to what we did with the EdTPA, I think is a fine example. We did what was called a soft rollout. So EPPs identified a certain percentage of their completers that would take the assessment. And so we talked to the EPPs about that selection. You don't want to either select your kind of lowest performers or your highest performers. You want a distribution of how you feel of your completers so that the cut score will be appropriately set. So it's possible we could do something in that regard. There are some other options that we could engage in to get some data for North Carolina in order to establish what that cut score is.
Anyone online? Dr. Blanton, do you have any questions?
Just one, and I may have missed it, but in the considerations that you talked about originally, the cost to candidates was mentioned in there. Do we have the cost, what that will be?
Yes, $425 is the cost of the assessment. I'm getting silent confirmation from our partners. Yes, $425 is the cost of this.
My understanding is the tasks are called cycles in this, and that they pay by cycle. So what we would call the EdTPA task is for undergraduate or initial teacher licensure, they would pay pieces of that as they go along. So it's broken down a bit over a year or however long, whatever the EPP decides to put it in. If, of course, this is all given if it's passed.
So just to clarify, so each cycle has its own cost. Is the cost different if you do the cycles individually as opposed to kind of bundling all 3 at the same time? So it's whether you decide to take this slow or fast, it's all the same. It's all the same cost.
It adds up. I asked if they had to, I asked before the commission meeting this morning if a candidate had to pay the whole cost and then just register for the cycle, and the answer to that was also no. That it's cycle by cycle, what we were calling in this presentation task by task. So I think that's important. Mm-hmm. So EPPs can spread that, and there's not is there a 12-month limit, or is there any kind of, there's probably a suggestion, but if someone said, we're in a part-time 18-month program and we'd like to do this 18-month internship, is there any kind of limit on a calendar year or anything like that at this point?
Yeah, yes.
Sorry, I'm pointing you. That's okay. And please introduce yourself so people online.
My name is Dr. Reginald Nichols. I'm Director of Assessment Programs for Evaluation Systems at Pearson.
Yes, it's 12 months. Once a candidate registers, they have 12 months in which to complete that assessment before their registration expires.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. Anything else from online?
Connie had her hand up, but I'm not sure if she had a question.
I had a question about the time period for the cycle, but it was just answered, so that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Leah.
And we were talking about, when we were saying the cost, we're talking the cost for the individual candidate, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I have one additional cost question. Is there only one option, candidate pay to the company, or sometimes with CPA institutions purchase vouchers or financial aid can be utilized? Those are all options? Okay.
So the answer to the question from our partners is the same options that exist for any other assessment from Pearson exist for this assessment.
I'm getting ready to ask you 5 questions. I have a question for either Dr. Tomberlin or Ms. Larkin McGuire. I'll start with a statement, then I'll ask my question. So we know that one of the positive things about principal preparation in North Carolina is there are multiple pathways. There's a full-time pathway and a part-time pathway that EPPs across the state, public and private, have created. And the representation on the task force, as we saw, was both from public and private, and some of those publics and privates have part-time pathways. So was there any, and we want to make sure that whatever we adopt, that that part-time and full-time candidates can be successful on that and have time to do the things they need to do. Mm-hmm. So this may be better for Aaron. Was there any resistance from reps on the task force that have part-time programs regarding concerns about their candidates successfully completing this type of portfolio in a part-time program?
Thank you. Pardon me, go ahead.
I was just going to say, not that they would rather have this or that, but I'm talking about the success when it came down to this particular recommendation. Was there any concerns regarding that?
Thank you for that question. We explicitly asked the task force, if your candidates were to be asked to complete this year, how difficult would it be to transition them to that? And we heard consistently across the different contexts, no, we can do this. In fact, we didn't hear any examples of anyone saying, wait a minute, I can think of a scenario for a particular candidate in a particular pathway for whom this would not be feasible. We heard no evidence nor examples of that. To the contrary, I'm thinking about a recent conversation with a diversity of EPPs where we were talking about a particular task, and they could very clearly visualize, candidates in this program, they would work on this task via this coursework at this point in their program. But a different EPP saying, no, but in our program, they might do that in the 3rd semester. And the journey to complete the tasks was different based on their designs of their program, but equally viable. And that's why I might also add a nuance in the timeline. My understanding from what our colleague just shared is that from the time you register to the time you must submit is 12 months. But that doesn't necessarily have to directly overlap from when you completed the work in a school, right? You could have done the work and then submitted it 6 months later. And so that even offers greater, I think, flexibility to different pathways. But the headline to the answer is, we asked our task force directly, and we heard no concerns about the viability based on candidate pathway.
Very good. Dr. Penfield, I now see your hand is raised. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron, for that response.
Thanks, everyone, for the presentation and all of your work on this. I'm going to try to lower my hand. My question is about candidates who don't pass, right? So they have an observed score that doesn't meet the cut score. And I'm curious about what information those candidates would get back. For example, do they get formative information about where they had strengths, where they had weaknesses? And if so, to what extent will that type of information be validated to provide, claims that can be supported by evidence?
Yeah, so for candidates that do not pass, they have a score report which lists by rubric how the candidate performed on that particular rubric and whether they passed that rubric or not. We also provide some other supports for the candidate and for the EPPs and coordinators. We have office hours, so we have candidates that come in that did not pass and want to ask questions about how they not just how they perform. We don't tell them prescriptive information about what they need to do, but we can answer some general questions. And we have the coordinators and the EPPs that can come in also have a separate office hours to talk to them about things that they see. We also meet with the assessors who score on an annual basis to look at how, what they see in the performance of the assessment, and we take that into consideration as we do revisions annually. And I've been working with the program for the past 3 years, working on version 7 of our assessment at this moment, getting feedback from the assessors relative to revisions, from the candidates, looking at the data, all those types of things. And we have coordinator meetings semi-annually to talk with coordinators about what we see, what rubrics, how each rubric is performing, the things that they could do to help support the candidates as they go through. So there are a variety of ways that we work with candidates and EPPs and coordinators to make sure that candidates are successful in the performance assessment. I hope that's a long answer to a short question.
I appreciate that info very much. Thanks.
You might just want to stay. Dr. Locklear, I see your hands raised.
Yes, just to piggyback on the question that was just asked, you're providing all of this support, and that's great, but just the worst case scenario, what would happen if a candidate doesn't pass at all? What options are there for that candidate? Will there be an option for him to take part in this process again? What's the procedure?
So if a candidate does not pass, of course, the candidate can take the cycle again. In the state, which California, we've enacted a secondary passing standard also, which gives candidates who don't pass another option to get through, and relying on the EPP to support the candidate, to support the candidates who do not pass. We also have background questions that we ask to ask the candidate how have they been supported in the process to get at some of that. But the candidate can always take the assessment again, looking at their score report, asking some questions during office hours, and take the assessment again. In California, we've been very successful with the candidates who do not pass, with the supports of the EPPs and office hours and the other supports we give. Candidates who go through a second time generally do very well.
Dr. Locklear, do you have any follow-up questions based on that response? I just want to make sure.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that everyone that's listening understands that there's an additional process and additional support if they don't pass the first time. We're hoping that everybody will, and we are thankful for all the support that they're given, but what happens if they don't?
Yeah, very good. Very good question. Dr. Nichols, could you please discuss when you see this most happen during an EPP preparation program? When is this typically done? based on your experience with working with EPPs in California?
Depending on the type of program, the cycles 1, 2, and 3 happen in their last years in that program, just working through the various cycles. They'll normally do, depending on when they can start, they normally do the first cycle in the fall, a second cycle in the middle, and a third cycle toward the spring. So it seems to be at the end of their educational program where this is embedded, even though pieces of, we have what we call CAPES, in California, the California Administrative Performance Expectations. They're embedded all the way through the program, but the candidates normally submit this toward the end of their programs.
Okay, all right. Could you also provide us some of the success rates of candidates from full-time and part-time programs from your experience of working with this assessment instrument?
Yeah, so I looked at, we produce an annual report to our commission every year, it's annual. And the success rate is very high. We have for our exam, for our assessment, we have a passing score in cycle 1 of 14, passing score in cycle 2 of 15, passing score in cycle 3 of 15. Between 92 and 100% pass every year. We do a quarterly review with our commission. So we look at the test scores. The latest ones are from March. We have between 92% on cycle 1. The trickiest cycle 2, because of the videos. Cycle 3. Does pretty well also, 96, 98%.
So one of the other things, I'm going to just go through my questions, and if somebody else has questions, just let me know. One of the other pieces is there is a tweaking of this, I'm going to call it a tweaking, from the California APA to the North Carolina, whatever we're calling, principal assessment, principal portfolio assessment, so maybe the PPA, I'm not sure what we're calling this. All right, so what about establishing the reliability and validity with the switching and adding in of the standards?
Sure, I think the whole portfolio assessment process adds to the reliability and validity. As soon as we get data, we look at how the candidates are performing. So we provide data on not just pass rate data, but looking at making sure that we are continually measuring. And I like the information about clarifying and the clarity, just putting into the language. Most of the work that I do on revisioning the California assessment is about language, to make sure the language in our directions, the language in the rubric, the essential questions are aligned and people know what they are, and that adds to the reliability and validity. So we look at how the test perform, the assessment is performing, how candidates are performing in the assessment, bringing together educators across the state and the assessors, calibrating the assessors and all that adds to the reliability and validity of our assessment, and also doing an annual review with educators across the state that look at our, the commission and educators across the state that look at the data that helps with reliability and the validity of the assessment.
Dr. Bullock, I can build on what Dr. Nichols just shared, which is to say that the draft that we've shared with the commission today, we have gone line by line through with Pearson, and at every turn, they've been tremendous thought partners, and at every turn we've explicitly asked, do any of these proposed tweaks undermine the validity of the original assessment? And the answer has been no. We have gone line by line, word by word, to confirm that our work of contextualizing and clarifying is not undermining the reliability and the validity of the original assessment design.
All right, thank you. That's very helpful. I think some of my other questions were answered. I do want to make a comment about the support in correlation with the EdTPA work that's done in the state. We have very strong support from Dr. Crawford and her team for EdTPA across the state, and that's made it very successful in our state and very successful for the EPPs. There have been things that have been created based on, we have monthly meetings that we can still go to after being implemented for many years. The scores training is very strong in the EdTPA. I'm assuming this is similar. And, you know, we've done a good job implementing a teacher prep performance assessment in the state that has remained for a long time, and a lot of that has to do with the support from the assessment vendor, which has been helpful and very responsive. I'm just going to say, I assume that we would have a similar set of supports and resources available to EPPs across the state for this assessment.
Yes.
You can say yes out loud, yes.
And we have sample submissions, so we have sample submissions available for the EPPs to look at and a variety of other supports. Goal is to make sure that everything is aligned well contextually, and then make sure that we provide supports for candidates, for EPPs, coordinators, and we do.
Okay, that's wonderful. And they also work with DPI and Andrew and Kim and all of us. So, again, and I'll say it again, and I've said it this third time, because it's very important for this commission to support all the pathways to licensure for principals. So it's going to be very important to think about part-time versus full-time programs with this, and support for people that are currently teaching, that are also getting a master's and a license, working toward a license to be an administrator. That's because, you know, anyone in this room that's taught, which there are a lot of people in this room right now that have taught, we know that's a pretty busy day. So,
I'm a former principal, former teacher, former vice president of Educator, provost, and working through all of those channels. And I know we provide supports, and in the states that are working in California, they do have both full-time and part-time programs, and the candidates, we measure all of that in the data that we receive.
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Nichols. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. Anything else? Dr. Tomberlin loves to answer our questions, so he's just waiting for some more. Anything else?
There are no more questions. Chair Bullock, this represents NCDPI's recommendation to the state, and we respectfully ask that you approve it and remand it to the State Board of Education.
Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. I'd like to commend the DPI staff on an excellent presentation this morning. Thank you all. And to Aaron. Aaron, thank you very much. Aaron, the facilitator of the task force. And thank all the task force members who have worked very hard in a very short time to move this work forward, given the timeline of the recommendation needed for State Board. So given all that, could I please, or do I have a motion to approve the North Carolina Principal Portfolio Assessment, the NCPPA, see that's really what it's called, to be sent to the State Board of Education in June?
So moved.
Thank you, Dr. Winter.
Second, this is Randy.
Thank you, Dr. Penfield. Any further discussion? I can't do it. Okay, we're going to call the roll to vote. Yeah, I don't, Madison or Ms. Edwards, are you still here, or do you need?
No, I'm good.
Okay, could you call the roll for the vote, please, for who's here, or who's, everyone, I guess.
Well, the power slides click up. It's in the. Okay.
Ready? So when your name is called, please just say yes or no, so it'll be very clear since we're online.
Okay. Dr. Blanton.
Yes.
Dr. Bullock.
Yes.
Ms. Edwards, yes. Dr. Elliott, not here. Dr. Fleming? Dr. Graham? Dr. Griffin?
Yes.
Ms. Hoskins?
Yes.
Ms. Jenkins is absent. Ms. Jones, also absent. Dr. Locklear?
Yes.
Ms. Patton is absent. Dr. Penfield?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Superintendent Truitt is not here. Dr. Weddington? Ms. Weisner?
Yes.
And Dr. Winter?
Yes.
Is that 10?
Okay. That was 10 votes for yes.
Did you call, Mattis, did you call Dr. Griffin?
Yes.
She did? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and he said yes.
Sorry, Bill. Make sure you, okay.
I think we had a couple that had to log off.
So how many yeses do we have?
We have 10 votes for yes.
So that is quorum, so motion passes. All right, congratulations. Thank you all for your intent concentration during this big agenda item for us. Thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for these discussions. I remind commission members that our next monthly meeting will be held in a hybrid manner, in person on the 7th floor of the State Board of Education boardroom, if it is open at that time, as well as virtually on Thursday, June 13th at 3:30 to 6:30. We have now completed our meeting, and unless there is additional business at this time, I ask for a motion to adjourn.
This is Craig Smith. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. We'll go with them. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank